Joining us now, Democratic Senator Bob Menendez of New Jersey. He's the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And I guess I'll put the question to you, sir. Do you plan to hold up reconciliation for the changes that you need? What are they? And are they worth it at this point?
Well, good morning. Look, there's a lot of good elements in this legislation. Certainly, the price negotiation for Medicare is going to help 62 million seniors across the country, 1.6 million in New Jersey. It includes provisions on an out-of-pocket cap that I authored and a smoothing provision that I also authored. That's good. The extension of the assistance under the Affordable Care Act that I helped author for 3 years is good. The climate provisions are good. But of course, we have to see a couple things. Number one, what is the parliamentarian's final word? What is this package actually going to look like at the end? Secondly, if there are going to be changes by Senator Sinema or anyone else, then obviously, I want to see what those changes are. And lastly, when we get to the process of the vote-a-rama, the constant amendments that will be offered by Republicans, I cannot see immigration amendments that have nothing to do with the legislation adopted. And if it were to stay in the bill, then that would affect my judgment as well. So there's a lot to talk about before we get to a final conclusion.
Okay, it sounds like there's still a lot more to be done, and we'll be following that. I want to ask you about another story that's happening right now. In a show of force, China is conducting live-fire military drills around Taiwan this morning in retaliation to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's visit to the island earlier this week. So, Senator, the exercises, which are the largest ever conducted by Beijing around Taiwan, are taking place at 6 different locations. Chinese state television reports long-range precision strikes are also being carried out in Taiwan's waters and airspace. Beijing says the drills will end at noon local time on Sunday. According to Taiwan's defense ministry, as many as 11 ballistic missiles were fired in the waters around the island. Taiwanese officials condemned the drills and said that they violate UN rules. Officials also said the exercises amount to a blockade of Taiwan's sea and air space. What's your reaction to this latest news and these moves by Beijing?
Well, using Speaker Pelosi's trip for the performative sound and fury, the truculence of Xi Jinping, is just that, an excuse. A couple of weeks ago, 23 fighter jets crossed the Taiwan Straits demarcation line. Nobody was visiting at that time. This is where China has been headed for some time. And so what we cannot allow is China to determine who can visit China, when they can be visited, and under what circumstances. Then Taiwan will be totally isolated, and the Chinese will have achieved their goal. And so I think at the end of the day, by Sunday, they will end their exercises. Of course, no one wants to see this, especially since I agree with the Taiwanese that they are violating international law. They're violating the territorial waters of Taiwan, and they are also affecting international commerce by the ships that have to deviate from that area that would be calling at port in Taiwan. And so they're affecting a lot more than Taiwan at the end of the day. And this is why we need to be able to stand up to China. If we had stood up to Russia in 2014, then we might not have the Ukraine situation we have today.
Well, Senator Menendez, you led me to our next question about the situation in Ukraine. It's just a two-parter. First, your reaction to the one senator, Josh Hawley, who voted against the Finland and Sweden joining NATO. And secondly, how much more of an appetite is there, do you believe, in the Congress to keep sending hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons to Ukraine?
Well, look, every senator has the right to vote as they wish. I think Senator Hawley is totally off base, and that is exemplified by the fact of the overwhelming vote. He was the only United States senator on either side of the aisle to vote no. So I think he has a rather isolated view of the world. I think it was a great vote. I'm glad to have led the effort in the committee and on the floor. getting a strong bipartisan vote to send a message to the rest of the world that collective defense at the end of the day strengthens us. It does not ultimately promote conflict. It prevents conflict. And I think that was a great message, and Sweden and Finland will be great allies in NATO. And lastly, as to your question about assistance to Ukraine, the question for us as a nation and other nations in the world is, do we want to help the Ukrainians defend themselves and defeat Russia, or will we find ourselves, as Russia has shown itself willing to do, continuing the advance towards other countries, and when they come upon a NATO country under Article 5 of NATO, we are obligated to defend them as they invoked Article 5, the only time in the 70-plus year history of NATO, on behalf of the United States after September 11th. I'd rather have Ukrainians fight for their freedom and territorial sovereignty than America's sons and daughters have to fight in some country because Russia invaded NATO, a NATO ally.
Speaking, Senator, of Russia, we're just getting some breaking news in that prosecutors there have asked a court in Moscow to sentence Brittany Griner to 9.5 years in prison on charges of cannabis possession. The request was made during closing arguments this morning. Griner's lawyer said a verdict in the case is expected about an hour from now. So, Senator, there's been all this talk of a prisoner swap deal that could be coming. Do you see something possible to get Brittany Griner home, or is the WNBA star going to sit in a jail in Moscow for 9 years?
Well, this is an incredible farce on behalf of the Russians. Brittany Griner shouldn't even be a captive, a prisoner. This is the Russians using Americans as hostages. She should not be spending one more day in jail. And as it relates to any swap, we'll see whether or not that can happen. One of our challenges globally is that we're going to have to tell Americans certain countries don't visit because at the end of the day, you become a hostage and you undermine U.S. national security issues. When we have to release someone like being contemplated, who is a major arms dealer and has a whole host of other consequences that his actions created, it sends a message that, yeah, get hostages from America and we will give you something that you want. So I want her to come home. She shouldn't even be arrested. There may be, I hope the court rejects the prosecution's request. She's made, I think, an excellent case as to why she shouldn't even be incarcerated. If there is a swap, we will welcome her home, but we also need to send a message to our fellow citizens that there are some places in the world you just can't go because ultimately you may very well find yourselves in a prison in that country.
I know, Senator, negotiations are ongoing, but for our audience watching this morning, is there a chance, is there a likelihood that a deal can be struck? We know the price, the asking price from the Russians gets higher every time we start the conversation, but do you feel confident there is some deal to be had to get Brittany Griner home?
I certainly hope so. I'm not privy to those negotiations and what is being asked. I do know that historically the Russians raise the ante every time that we have an offer to them, and they feel that they can get more, and that's part of our challenge.
All right, Chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Senator Bob Menendez, thank you very much for being on this morning.